because I spend about 40% of my time with cranberries. This year I was asked to talk about hemp. I had to do more research for that. And I really had a blast this afternoon because I've been pulling things aside for ever since I was asked last spring. But I was watching some new things today and it was really neat. It's very evolving. Last spring, well, there's a registration process with the state to do hemp. And last spring, about the time of that deadline, it was every phone call was about hemp. So there is a lot of interest, including you folks, because you asked for me to talk about it. And if you drive from Plover to the west side of Rapids, I think you're going to see 4 or 5 different CBD oil billboards or advertisements. So there's that too. So just a fact, in 2019, the Wisconsin Department of Ag, which is called DATCAP, you had to register to grow it. They registered 2,100 growers in our state. And it was the second year you could do it. You could do it the year before. I think it was like a 3 to 4 time expansion from before. So it's a really hot interest. And let me just ask you, any of you growing hemp or know somebody that is? Okay. We're going to call upon you folks, I think. We're really winging it here, so we'll see how it goes. You had to report, you had to register, and you had to tell how many acres, but how many of you this year found it was really wet and you didn't get all the things done in your garden that you had intended? So that'd be true for hemp growers too. So they've registered 4,000 acres in the state as planted. But it could be that there's unreported yet at this point. But it is very closely regulated. So there really is a lot of interest in this thing. So federally, there's still a lot of laws against marijuana. And I did not want to be in the courthouse with examples of hemp plants and have us all get locked up. So there are no exhibits either, but that's the excuse because it's still a very touchy thing. Hemp is, it's not, I've seen some things where it says it's a cousin or it's a close relative to marijuana. I'm a dairy farmer. There's beef cattle and there are dairy cattle. And they can interbreed, right? There's no problem there at all. They're not that different. It's exactly the same situation with hemp. Marijuana, hemp, they're not cousins. It's the same species, just selected for different traits. And it's a very versatile, it's a very neat species. But hemp was grown agriculturally. Kentucky was the center, but we had it here in Wisconsin. It was mainly grown for fiber in the 1930s and 40s. If you think about World War II, if you didn't live through it, we all heard there were tremendous shortages, right? They were making all these military supplies and all this stuff, and they had shortages of fiber for rope and fabric and things like that. And so there was a boom time of hemp, because that's one of the uses for hemp, is fiber. But it was soon after World War II that they also recognized that it's also marijuana, and so they got very strict in the regulations, and we haven't been able to legally grow hemp since right after World War II until about 2 years ago. So that's the federal rules. So you probably heard of some states like Colorado was the first one, but if you look at a map now, there's like about a third of the country that allows the marijuana type, either medicinal or just full out complete use. And so this crop that's got a lot of other agricultural uses was not been allowed because of its association with marijuana. But the Farm Bill, have you ever heard of the Farm Bill? Every 5 years we get a new Farm Bill?
Yes.
The last Farm Bill really at the federal level addressed this stuff. And it's okay to grow hemp now. Still very closely regulated. transport across state lines. I have a colleague in our office that grew some clones this year, and they were started out in Colorado, and they had to have identification and permit. It's not Janelle. That's another thing I found. I was talking to some extension people that work with extension, and I was like, "Oh, your brother called me about hemp," and it's like, "Huh?" So it's really still taboo. I don't think people tell each other. I think they do it in the back lot. Not everybody. Some people are out and proud, right? But it's still it's still highly regulated.
What do the plants look like?
They look like hot plants.
Like what?
Well, I can't show you a picture.
They look like marijuana plants.
Very similar to marijuana.
Yeah, yeah.
As if we know that.
So
Large green leafy plants.
palmate. So they're it radiates out like a palm. It's not. It's what's the other? It's not just.
It's not a simple leaf.
And it's a pretty large
compound.
leaf,
Yeah,
and it's jagged leaf. And actually, for agriculture, it's a very vigorous grower given good conditions. So in agriculture, we're always trying to create tons of biomass or things like that. And that's why you see cornfields, right? Because corn is a plant that starts from a seed and grows 10 feet tall in 4 months' time. We grow crops like that are high yielding. Well, hemp is right up in there as far as the high yielding type of crop.
Say, Matt, on the scientific part of that, how much have they did studies on the chromosome or the scientific facts of one being marijuana being of a higher concentration where it affects the people more than what the hemp, because hemp's used for many different things.
Mm-hmm.
Have they done a lot of studies
On the genetics of them?
on the chromosomes and the genetics on that? Being if there's
So in my studies, I think last year I was telling you about the ploidy of cranberries, if they're tetraploid and how many. It's not a thing that I came across yesterday and today. So I do not know, but they are the same ploidy, because if you have a related, what do they grow? Daylilies, there's tetraploid and diploid, and I don't think those, you can't cross those very easily, I don't think. So there is absolutely no problem crossing the hemp strains with they are very similar plants, okay?
And as far as research is concerned, the federal government won't fund any research on a
Controlled substance?
No, what's the term for all of the addictive schedule?
Yeah.
Is it Schedule 2?
But they will now fund. University of Wisconsin has trials. There's a field day later this week at the flagship. Marshfield really is like the #2 research station in the UW research station system. But Arlington, which is only half an hour north of Madison, on beautiful prairie soil, that's the flagship. Their big summer field day is later this week, and they have a big segment on hemp.
But not
So,
marijuana.
what's that?
Not marijuana, because I can't,
No,
it's
hemp.
not funded.
Hemp.
You can't.
Well, they
you
do
don't-
call it hemp. THC is what marijuana is.
Yeah.
And then it's hemp CBD.
Well,
It's the non-marijuana.
well, I think we'll get this discovery by the time we get to the end. So,
That's how you're supposed to classify it.
Has to be below a certain percentage.
yeah, I'm
Okay.
talking way too slow, I can tell, because you guys are all way ahead of me. Just tell you one more story. We're doing a lot of work on cover crops because we're trying to prevent erosion and improve water quality, and so we're trying to do a lot of cover crops. There's a plant, no genetic similarity, that's a nice opportunity for a cover crop called, the common name is sun hemp. And before these rules came out, the administrative types that were looking at projects and saying we're going to look at soybeans, millet, brassicas, sun hemp. Wait! No sun hemp, even if it's got the name hemp in it. So it's really been taboo, but the taboo is gone. I think that's part of why there's so much interest. There's some of the intrigue that, oh, it's marijuana. Some of it is like it's just been pent up interest. Some of it is farmers are really struggling for other alternatives and they're willing to try anything. But it is a very high interest crop right now. All right. Keep on. All right, so you've already gone to this. It's got many multiple uses. And I told you the historical use was fiber. It's thought now that fiber is a thing, and we know in Canada where they do things differently, and they're ahead of us on legalizing. They're doing a lot of work with hemp for fiber. But here in the US, we expect, and I guess I didn't even realize this probably a year ago, that oil is going to be the highest interest, highest value thing. And the oil, okay, so what makes it marijuana is THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, like cannabis, diol. And that's what gets people high. Except for when you smoke marijuana, you get THC and you get the CBD and you get a lot of other phenols and things. That, you know, any plant has got a complex number of things. So, the effect is not always necessarily just of the one product. But CBD has a lot of reported medicinal values. And you hear about people think it's very good for epilepsy. I have a different slide where it has a long list. Very little that's documented because, you know, research trials take a minimum of 3 years, probably some of them 10, and they haven't been able to do that research. But people have been able to sell CBD because it has no THC in it. So there's a lot of interest. You can go to the Family Foods health store and you can buy CBD. You can buy it a lot of places now. So two different things, THC and CBD, the fiber, and since it's a rapidly growing business, people need to grow breeding stock too, right? I want to buy seed or I want to buy clones. You could get in this hemp business to supply other hemp growers because it's an expanding business. Okay, we as humans have an incredibly long history with hemp. I was looking this up, and you can find evidence of it 10,000 years ago. So 10,000 years ago would be 8,000 BC. They're called achenes, which is kind of like the drupe, where it was seed with the fleshy part around it. They're digging in archaeological sites in Japan, and that stuff is still there. So they knew that people in Japan in 8,000 BC were growing hemp. Actually, in China, there's decorative imprints on pottery. So they're kind of like celebrating it by 4,000 BC. And in Korea, so we're kind of in the Far East, they were making clothing out of it by 3,000 BC. And I think a lot of us have heard about the Assyrians. They were in Mesopotamia like the Babylonians. They were the first ones that were writing about psychoactive properties. So we don't know if they discovered the THC part first, but Herodotus, who's a very famous Greek historian, described that the Scythia, which is Central Asia into Iran, that their word for it was those who walk in smoke. So it's got a long and ancient history for fiber, even for food, and for its mind-altering status. So the scientific name of what is the scientific name of hemp or marijuana? First word is cannabis, but there's other. It's cannabis sativa. Well, a crop that's very near and dear to me is our alfalfa crop, and it's called Medicago sativa. So I was like, what does sativa mean? It means cultivated. So a plant that's been selected and bred by humans, not just by nature, is sometimes going to get that suffix sativa. So that tells you another thing, that we've been working with this plant for a long time. because it's cannabis sativa. Well, what are its relatives? I think that's kind of fun. Do you know any relatives to hemp and marijuana?
Is Cleome? Really?
Hey, you know, that's not on the list, but I know where you're coming with that because it's got some of the sticky sort of
And it's
character.
got a funky smell to it
Yeah.
too. I mean, I've smelled it before. It was like, what the heck?
So you go through the list, and you know, we lost most of our elm trees.
Yeah.
Well, they're not a close relative, but they're a relative. It's not like they're far away. And if you know, a lot of plants are in the rose family. You'll see that hemp is in the rose family. But I think one, if we don't have pictures of someone, what does a plant look like? A fairly close relative is stinging nettle. So that's a plant that can grow 6 feet tall. It's usually got dark green growth. It's vigorous. And isn't that funny? You know, it exudes chemicals that you don't like on your skin, and hemp exudes chemicals. So I think that's a good association. Another one, because we know it has a drug affiliation, and our culture is in love with alcohol, hops. And that little cone on a hop is pretty similar to the seed fruit on a hemp plant. So hops are a relative. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, another reason why the fiber market is not where we're going to go with this probably is that fiber market in general is depressed because we're making synthetic fibers out of petrochemicals nowadays. If you have sheep and you're trying to make a living off the wool, you know that most people just throw it away nowadays. It's not hardly worth after you get sheared. So I know not all of it does. You see people spinning and stuff, but fiber market, cotton, wool, flax, which is what makes linen, depressed market. So the other thing that's difficult about fiber is if you're going to grow hemp for fiber, you're basically going to do a lot of things like you cut hay. You're going to mow it someday, you're going to lay it down, you're going to let it dry in the sun, and it's actually called a process called retting. I think I'm going to talk about that later. But it's very bulky. So it's an expensive thing because where would you take your fiber? There's no plant in Wisconsin. So, you know, that may develop, that may come back. But the other thing is just the logistics of any developing industry is that you got to develop the infrastructure. And in hemp, it's just not there. Okay. All right, so someone has talked about this definition already, because we still are highly regulating marijuana. Hemp has to be, what's the magic number to be hemp and not marijuana? It's got to be low.
Less
What
than
percent?
0.3.
0.3.
Less than 0.3, or 3.
Under, yes. Okay? Under 0.3%, they take it to a lab, and actually Department of Ag does it, and it's got to test under 0.3%. If it comes back over, you cannot transport it, and you're probably going to have to destroy it. And as if you test it, they're advising you that if it comes back favorable, which last year I think it's about 90% of them did, you should process it and use it right away, because it might by some random check get tested again. And as the plant gets more mature, the THC will go up. So if you passed, you want to get that stuff done because it might not pass the next time. And they talked about it's a pretty reliable test because people that failed and were surprised because they bought good stock and stuff like that, everything that was retested failed the second time. So it's a pretty good test. Now I want you to have some idea how strict 0.3 is. If you look at marijuana, when they were confiscating pot off the streets in the 1990s, they were finding that on average the marijuana was testing 3 to 4% THC. So 10 times more concentrated than the level that can be found in hemp. But we're continuing to breed and improve all these plants. So the last numbers I saw is 2013, so I would guess they're higher still. Marijuana on average was 10 to 16% THC. All right, so you know that somewhere in Wood County, someone is growing their own pot. And if you're growing your hemp patch and there's pollen coming from that wild stuff, that can mess up
Your crop.
your crop. And also, let's assume that CBD is the main thing. You're going to grow just females, okay? I don't think I got to that point yet. But if you were to grow it for hemp, for fiber, you'd grow males and females. So there'd be, those two uses don't want to be near each other either, because you'd have wild pollen from the fiber hemp pollinating on your CBD plants. So they should both be low, but you don't want, in the CBD business, you don't want males. Okay? I thought someone would slam on that. Who wants males anyhow? I don't. And besides people cultivating the stuff, because we did grow it in Wisconsin before, there is still, I know it's more common in southern Wisconsin. I think it's more of a southern crop, but there is still wild marijuana growing in central Wisconsin. And one of the terms for it is ditchweed, because we can use the word weed, right? So there's that out there too. So you do have to be vigilant if you're going to get in the CBD business, because there's probably other stuff going on that you're not aware of. And this also gets me more of a problem. Let's say, so I was reading about, so it's pretty now legal for many more uses in Illinois. So these southern counties across the southern end of the state are actually getting stricter in their regulation of hemp, because they're getting issues of people from Illinois coming into southern Wisconsin. So, and that's also true by the UP. So because there's a lot of state regulations, yet there's more issues near state borders.
Matt, just like the margarine situation.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so I think we did some of this already. CBD, there's many claims. It's not all research backed. The market is not really regulated. The other thing is, because there's really high demand, you should really question if it guarantees whatever it is, 500 milligrams. Do you have the wherewithal to able to go test what you're buying for CBD, if it's got that or not? So it's pretty wild, wild west right now. And probably some of it's what it should be, but it's not always. And there's not much for guarantees, but there are a lot of testimonials out there that there are real effects with CBD. And I'm concerned because they expect even this year to be about a 10-fold increase in CBD oil produced in the country from a year ago. So I think there's pent-up demand, and last year if you were able to make some CBD oil, you might have done well. And if you stay at your game and become a very good producer, it may still work for you. But I would think you should expect lower prices in the future as more people go about producing this stuff. Then I got a nice picture. Okay, so
That's your computer on.
the CBD oil comes off of kind of a bract that's near the flower head. So there's some CBD in all the tissue, but when you're really cultivating, you were growing for CBD?
Yes.
So can you explain that to them? What part of the plant is where the CBD is?
Well, the top of the plant is like where you get your big flowers from. The flower and the leaves, not the stalk, but the leaves closest to the flower is where you would press out and get your CBD oil from.
So you don't have to press the whole plant. You can go through and pick basically the flower head.
Well, some of the stalk the processors don't want, because then they just have that laying around. So
Yeah.
they want you to cut up the stalk and then get rid of, do the leaves, but the flower is what actually gives you a lot of the oil. That's why you don't want the males, because the males, all they do is, pollinate, and then you would get seed instead of flower.
Right. So the highest The highest oil is an unfertilized female plant. So she's right, that plant gets ruined for CBD purposes if it starts sexual reproduction and if the level goes down. So the concentration of CBD is in unfertilized female flowers.
How much oil is in that?
They talk about like 1,000 pounds per acre. You know, and well, how many plants can you plant in an acre? And different people are gonna, because everyone's learning, we're using different techniques a lot, but I mean, that flower part is a fairly high oil part, but it's, I don't think it's as high oil as like a soybean or something like that, but it's concentrated in, do you know a ratio of how many pounds of tissue turns into how many pounds of oil?
Some say depending on how big your plant is, you can get anywhere from like 2 pounds up to like 8 pounds of oil per one plant.
That's quite a bit, actually. Yeah.
But it all depends on how big your plants are. You know, some plants can be really, you know, variety can be real short, but bushy. Some of them can be 6 to 8 feet tall.
Yep. Okay.
Do you
so,
roll it or what, to get the oil?
You put it through a press.
Okay.
squeeze it out. Yep.
But
So,
the
and then
farmer-
it's got to be purified after that, right? It's not pure
Yeah,
CBD
it's called like
oil.
raw, I think it's called raw
Yeah.
oil.
Yeah.
So this is time consuming.
Yeah, it's
Oh.
all hand labor. Most of it's hand labor.
All right, I think that's, if I didn't have it, so there are no herbicides or insecticides or fungicides that are approved for cannabis, for hemp. Because you have to go through a federal approval process to get any of those products approved for a crop. And nobody could do any research on it. So it is pretty much an organic business, although people that receive the crop do test to see if, you know, if you did use anything like that and you found it worked, because they don't want anything. It's pretty much an organic market. Which means that there's a lot of, she talked about the labor of harvesting, you know, hand picking. I think you're going to know your hoe pretty well, or you're going to use plastic ground covers. You got to use all mechanical type ways to control weeds, because there's nothing to use on them. Supposedly the insect pressure will be getting worse, because whenever you bring in a novel plant that the insects don't know a bunch about, things are pretty good. But if we start growing acres and acres of this, we'll get more insects. And I'm going to tell you, there's websites from the University of Wisconsin that cover what all the, there are insect pests, you know, but we think it'll probably get worse. So.
Can I ask you on that, you're bringing up insect, is Japanese beetle going to be one of them?
Yeah, that's on the list.
Yeah.
That's on the list. Japanese beetle eats like 3,000 species, right?
Yeah.
And we know that it likes raspberries and rose bushes and stuff really well, fruiting trees. Less so than other things, but I would bet they probably might like cannabis pretty well. Okay, so let's go through what the claims about CBD are. Anti-seizure, anti-inflammatory, analgesic, anti-tumor, antipsychotic, inflammatory bowel disease, depression. So I assume that not all of those things will be found to be true. But I'm not saying that there's not an element of truth that CBD does some neat stuff, right? We just don't really have any research on any of it right now.
Are there people that are growing it illegally in, say, in Wood County?
Well, there were before we had approval for growing hemp, right? I think there's less incentive to grow illegal hemp than there is to grow illegal marijuana, because there is no opportunity to grow legal marijuana in the state of Wisconsin right now, right? So yeah, there's people that grow, farmers that have cornfields, when they go to harvest, will see that someone has moved into their cornfield and moved out some stuff and started cultivating marijuana. So yeah, or in county land, because you wouldn't want to get caught growing the marijuana on land that you own, right? So if you want to grow marijuana, a great place to do it would be on public land, a county forest, because unless they catch you there growing it, your name isn't on it, right? Okay.
In the UP, it was the state forests.
Yeah,
Yes,
Mhm.
International.
okay.
Complete with plastic tubing for irrigation and all the rest.
Yep. Okay, so I'm probably getting along already, so we'll try to speed up here a little bit. There's some neat things about this hemp, the marijuana, hemp, whatever we're going to call cannabis. So I'm familiar with corn and soybeans, and the plant is both male and female, and a lot of plants are that way, but I think you as master gardeners are aware that some species don't go that way. And hemp is one, that there tend to be male and female plants. And so you can identify them by, I think, 5-6 weeks after they're sprouted, and you can remove the males, which for the CBD you need to do. But there are also hermaphrodites, so the species is not exclusively male or female. So you do have to get rid of the hermaphrodites because they're male, and you got to get rid of all the males. We talked about why. It's really a high value crop. If you get these, so I was going to go to the website and share it with you, but if you do everything right, develop really high quality, an acre is assumed that you could generate $70,000 worth of product per acre. But it's more typical that you won't have it that pure and you won't have that yield, and you'll only get $10,000 per acre. Okay? But you know, on corn, we're thankful if we generate $600 or $700 an acre, right? And we grow acres and acres of corn. So it is a high value crop. So that means you can probably justify a lot of this high labor thing. And I work with cranberry growers. Again, that's a higher value crop than corn or soybeans. And so they can justify more labor, more weed control, more insect control, because the crop is worth more. But on the high end, this is a very high value crop. And this is not, we're not talking about marijuana, we're talking about a high yielding CBD crop, right? So there is the upside there. Another fact about it is it pollinates by the wind, so we don't have to worry so much about the bees, which corn would be that way. They call them pre-flowers in the material that I was looking at, but I think it would be similar to buds. So you can tell a male from a female when they have pre-flowers, which is by 6 weeks old. And the females have a pistil. So they got these little buds, and they'll have like a little hair-like projection out of it. Those are females. If they don't, they're males.
Are they grow, you plant them, you plant seeds?
So you can grow them from seed. You can grow seed that, I don't know what that process is, but you can grow seed that somehow or other has been sexualized, and it should be mainly female. It's not as, and you can grow it from clones. If you find a really exceptional plant that's, you know, is going to set up for a high yield, you can vegetatively propagate that. That's what we call clones, right? You know, and some plants clone really easy. Some of them are a lot harder, but like my colleague, those were clones that were, they're all identical, easier to manage than seed. So those are all options.
So do they grow them in rows like they do corn? I mean, if you're going to grow a whole acre, do they plant them like they plant?
Okay, so
Or you just throw it out there?
I think this is fun because when you start getting how many pounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, seeding date, soil temperature, tillage method, seeding depth, that I'm all over that. You know, I'm used to that stuff. So if you're growing hemp for fiber, you're going to put about 60 pounds per acre. You're going to plant it in a little warmer weather than maybe corn, but if you don't get in by the middle of June, you should not bother probably. And you do seed. There's also grain because there's hemp oil that people eat. It's not pure CBD, you know, it's a food basically. And that you'd plant, you want a little stouter plant to support the grain heads, so you'd plant half the seeds. So there's a picture on here. When you grow hemp for fiber, you're densely planting them together, so the plants have they want to get taller than their neighbor. So they can grow really tall. They got like a 6-foot guy standing in front of a field of them, and it's like there's 3 of him. very dense and high, so very high tonnage. But you're going to be more into clones and more select things if you're growing it for the oil.
Is that why it's so expensive to get started?
Well, the
cost of the
seed is,
yeah,
yeah.
the cost of it.
Matt, our central Wisconsin has a variety of soil all the way from extremely sandy to mud,
Yep.
wet clay. So where does,
Pretty uniformly, you know, most crops that you talk about, they'll say it's adaptable for a pretty wide. Hemp does not like wet. Especially if you're growing it for the fiber, you got to get it dried down. So actually, you want good fertile soil, but you want it to be well drained. So the Vesper area is not the first
so
candidate.
bring out the tiling?
Yes, that would help too.
Or an outfield that's well drained, or it's got a little hill on it.
Yep.
That's really well.
Yeah, it likes drainage.
Does hemp plant
Like
return
sand.
anything to the soil like beans?
It's not a legume. It doesn't put nitrogen like beans
It
do.
doesn't put anything back into the soil. What about leaving a residue of anything that's not good for the
Well,
next crop?
if you grow something pretty big and work that all in, it's going to add a lot of organic matter. It's got a pretty fibrous root system. So there are touted benefits of it improving soil texture and health, and just having another crop, you know, instead of growing corn, soybeans, you know, now if you grow corn, soybeans, wheat, hemp, there's more variety there. So I think there are some agronomic opportunities, but there's no way we're ever going to grow like we grow like acreages of corn and soybeans. There's not the demand for that. Male flower, when it starts to seed, it actually kind of looks like little bananas. So if you know you got that out there, it's another sign that you blew it and didn't get it removed before
So
that.
you have to go through and dig those out. You gotta pull
You
them
have to
out
walk through your fields daily.
daily and pull them out.
Daily, or every other day, and pull out your male plants.
And if by the time you get to bananas, you're like, why didn't I catch that sooner, right?
That's right.
Yep.
Right, and so when do you harvest? How long do you when do you harvest it?
Okay, let's do that one right now on fiber. So harvest method on fiber is you'd mow it like you'd mow a hay field, and normally farmers 3 or 4 days later have their hay all made. It's called redding, and it's a semi-controlled rot that lasts 2 to 3 weeks, and you rake it 2 to 3 times. You cut it green, it's really massive, you let it turn brown, and ideally you make large square bales out of it. But it sits all for a long time, and you try to get it down to 10 to 12% moisture, which we struggle getting crops down that low. So that would be done. The other thing about the males is once they're done pollinating, they die. Their purpose is done and they die right away. So if you're growing it for fiber, you want to catch that fiber from the males too. So about the time they start flowering, that's when you're going to harvest those. If you're growing it for grain, you need the males, but they will be dead by the time you go harvest the grain. And I think the typical time for CBD is the month of September, probably.
Harvest time?
Yeah. Yep. Grain hemp is really a pretty rare thing, but it is a thing. I think we covered most all of those. Breeding stock can be very expensive. Covered, it's high labor, no approved chemicals, got to worry about contamination. Acre is a lot of work. All right. Because I couldn't deliver you the presentation, most of you have email?
Yes.
So I will get this as a PDF, the presentation, and you'll be able to see. And it will be in color if you look at it on your computer too, right? Okay. But really what is a really neat source is it's at the end of the presentation. So it's called www.youtube.com/Wisconsin Hemp. They have about 7 hours of presentations on they're in hours. Most of them are hour segments, but some of them are 15 minutes. But they have one on hemp production for fiber. And it really does a nice job of talking about the male and female and cultural methods. There's one on hemp for CBD, and they're going to talk a lot about the flower parts in there. There's harvesting hemp. And even for the oil, you tend to harvest it. And some people harvest the whole plant, but some people pick off the part, but you probably hang it and dry it before you. So you need like, how many are familiar how we used to grow tobacco, the 3-speed tobacco sheds? So those would work, but most tobacco sheds have like birds flying in and crapping on your tobacco. And this hemp is worth a lot more than even the tobacco was. So they suggest that the concept of a tobacco shed where you hang it upside down and you let it dry is a great thing, but you might want it more tight because you don't want vermin in there, right?
So a dryer would work.
You don't want to put a lot of heat. You can force air and speed up the drying. But you don't want to put a lot of heat on it because that'll affect the oil quality, I guess.
Oh, okay.
Rancid.
Yeah, that's actually a term that was used. So it would kind of cook and make your oil go rancid. So I highly suggest, if you're at all interested in this topic beyond what I talked to you about tonight, that the YouTube channel from Wisconsin is really neat. There's a couple of them on the regulations you have to go through. If you're not actually serious about it, I'd probably skip those. But if you're curious about hemp, there's some really nice discussions. Let's say you're an old farmer and you know that Dad used to plant the corn 2 inches down and the fertilizer is 2 inches to the side. And there's all that stuff on there, and how if you're wanting to be fiber instead of grain, if you want to be CBD, they have a lot of things on there. So I verbally told you, and it'll be on the last slide of the presentation. So.
Is there a picture of the plant that went on the slide so we can see what the plant looks like?
Yes, several.
Thank you.
There are pictures of the leaves, there's pictures of the inflorescence of the flower, pictures of what the whole field looks like, if you would bale it or if you'd red it, hang it in the storage shed. All of those pictures are there. So.
How many licensed processors are there in the state of Wisconsin?
I think it's like, what was the first number of growers? Was it a couple thousand? Was that the
No,
number?
processors.
Yeah, but how many? I gave you the
Growers,
number.
I think you said was 2,100.
Yeah, I think it's like 600 or 700, and I don't think all those are prepared to deliver on it, but you had a license for that too.
Right.
So there's like 600 or 700 people in the state, and that is in the slides on the website too.
Okay.
So I think you will enjoy that set of PowerPoints. They're really video. They're video presentations.
Could you give us that website again then, please?
Yep. www.youtube,
Yes.
youtube.com, /Wisconsin Hemp. And it's actually available at another website, the whole set as well. And that address is about twice as long.
At the fair, there was a booth there, a lady had hemp products, and she had a length of rope there that was put into a puppy toy. And
Yep.
that rope, I expected it to be like sisal.
Yep.
This was as soft as can be.
Yep.
And I know in World War II they were making uniforms out of hemp.
Yes.
So that was, and it was so soft. It was really neat.
But if you think about that fiber thing, think about you're going to mow it, and then you're going to let it sit out in the sun for 3 weeks, and you're going to rake it 3 times, and then you're going to bale it, and then it'll still be really bulky, and you're going to probably have to haul it 2 states away. It's just not going to be competitive. It may become more competitive, but it's got a tough road to go to be a competitive fight. When all the other fiber crops are struggling as well, because
Yeah.
a lot of us got some polyester or something on, so.
Yeah, that's what everybody's hollering about plastics and things, so why not go back to the,
Oh,
yeah. go back to hemp.
Well, and it's laying out in the field, and you're talking about even if you roll it or whatever.
this year in Wood County, I don't think it would have been a controlled rot. It would have been a rot. So, yes.
I read on Wisconsin Public Radio has a newsletter, and they said that last year the hemp, the CBD oil growers had a tough time because they got fungus or mold.
Yeah.
And then because of our wet fall, and then because it was a human consumption item, they couldn't use it, and there's no alternative market.
Yeah.
There was not a veterinary use for it, so there was no alternative market. So it really was kind of a bust last year for a good number.
You got a whole bunch of people interested. They have no rule book to go to figure out. Everyone's figuring out on their own. CBD, you can't even go back to history because CBD wasn't a thing that they were doing at World War II. You know that even the stuff that we grow now, we grew in World War II, we do way differently now. I don't think we're going to find that Wisconsin is the best place to grow hemp for CBD. But it's maybe an okay place. And it's just like Capital Brewery in Madison wants to grow Washington County hops and Wisconsin barley, so they can say that beer is all sourced from Wisconsin. So there's going to be when you go to the local farmers market, there's going to be a demand, I think, for local CBD. Why would we want to bring that out from Colorado? So,
Right.
but my suspicion is that we are not the best place. Someplace drier is probably a better place to grow it.
Yeah, my daughter's up in the bluffs of Genoa, and they do all terrace farming.
Yep.
They also, at one time, I think it's within the last 10 years, and they had quit the tobacco up in that area, but they were growing tobacco from that. But what you're talking about, that terracing, that's almost like the perfect area because it flows and you have a proper drainage.
And you want, when you're drying it, you want good air movement too.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that's
There's probably
one area
microclimates.
that's probably
Well, we know that from here down to the Dells, the Central Sands is pretty sandy, and you can water it as you want. That might be a pretty good place,
But I won't give my son-in-law any idea.
Okay.
Around Darlington, there's an organic gardener who is planting basically a row of tobacco and then a row of hemp. And the hemp was shorter. It wasn't very tall. I didn't know what it was because it was almost like a shrub rather than.
There are a lot of different varieties too.
Yeah.
And
So
I don't think
was-
this is probably the best year. I know that a lot of people didn't get it in as early as they wanted but I think there are short hemp varieties and tall hemp varieties. And we're still discovering which is the best for CBD. And maybe the best variety in Wisconsin is not the best variety in Kentucky. A lot to learn.
How many growers in Wood County?
That is information that's available, but I don't know the number. But it's funny this spring.
I want to say it's like 14 or 16.
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't think all of them will stick with it. And probably some new ones will come on, but it's not an easy, it's pretty high labor.
Very high labor. Everything is done by hand.
Yeah.
There's a problem there.
So like when you asked about planting, you planted in rows, we hand planted. Some people used, that I know, used a tree planter. We're doing like 3 to 4 acres of it. So we mow it like every couple weeks to keep it.
The inner
keep the
rows?
weeds down. Yep, keep the weeds down. And like you said, no fertilize. We did fertilize. We fertilized right before, a couple weeks before they budded, started flowering. We did a immediate fertilizer, and then we also did a slow release.
And you grew it last year too?
Nope.
This is your first year? So they look pretty good?
Yeah, they look very good.
Good.
The labor in ag, as we all know, and I just saw a sign go up for cranberry
Workers,
And I
yeah.
think
Up to
there's-
$20 an hour, didn't it?
Yes, you saw the same sign.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, even if they're
Yes,
paying
stand.
30 and up, they don't want to do that type of work.
Yeah. So anyhow, I think some of us want to get home probably, so if you have any other questions, you can ask me, but.
Well, you asked, this was one of the items on the suggested list of topics that came in.
So.
So, and we respected that, so thank you, ma'am.